Welcome everyone to the auditor's report. So as you would have guessed, this is auditing theory, and today we are going to be talking about the auditor's report. Now it's a little bit more exciting than usual. I know I always tell you that auditing theory is an exciting topic in the hopes that somehow you might end up agreeing with me. But this particular series is going to be more exciting than usual because we have finally come to the culmination of the entire audit process. Okay, so basically this is if we were to liken it, this is our output. Okay, this is what we are going to finally produce. This will somehow tie up everything that we have learned since the very beginning when we first learned about assurance engagements and then the basic concepts, all the way down to talking about internal controls and evidence gathering, and even way down to sampling and talking about the transaction cycles. We have now finally arrived at the preparation of the auditor's report. So as you could very well see in our course outline, this is of course already part of the section on concluding the audit. And as you would have noticed, we are going to touch on a number of Philippine standards in auditing as we go about our discussion on the auditor's report. So allow us first by starting, of course, with forming an opinion and the report. Now we always say that we begin with the end in mind, but as it is, this particular section here, this particular topic here is technically already the end of the audit process. And so what we will now do is we're going to go back to the very beginning and remember what is it that we have always invoked to be the objective of an external auditor in the performance of an audit of financial statements. And if you must remember, we say that at the end of the audit, the auditor shall form an opinion on the financial statements based on the conclusions drawn from the audit evidence obtained, and the auditor should express clearly that opinion through a written report. And that is precisely where we are at now. So we have already talked about assertions and gathering evidence, and how from the assessment of the evidence gathering procedures we're able to come up with that conclusion. But according to the standards, it is not enough that we come up with a conclusion. It is not enough that we form an opinion. We also have to express that opinion clearly by means of a written report. And that written report is, of course, the auditor's report. So let's take a look at question number 1. Forming the auditor's opinion and report includes, and we have here a lot of choices, and we're going to determine whether they are included or not, starting, for example, with determining the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence obtained. And I think you will agree with me, this is a big yes, because precisely it is our evidence in which we base our conclusions, yeah? So the first item there is definitely a yes. Evaluating the materiality of the misstatements identified, and together with me, let's say it together, this is also a yes. Okay, that's why we say the financial statements are free from material misstatements, and we could only say that if we have evaluated the materiality of the misstatements we have identified. So for the first item is a yes. The second item is also a yes. The third item says performing necessary quality control reviews, and perhaps at this point you might be brought back to a time when you talked about quality controls, okay, or your Philippine standards on quality controls. And allow me to remind you that this one right here is also a yes. Okay, so we do perform quality control review, particularly engagement quality control reviews for entities, or if your clients are listed entities. And then communicating audit results with management and those charged with governance, that is of course also a yes. So for question number 1, that is letter A, it's a yes to all 4, reminding us that when we form our opinion and prepare our report, it would include all of these following items. Going now to question number 2, after the auditor has completed all the audit procedures, it is necessary to combine the information obtained to reach an overall conclusion as to whether the financial statements are fairly presented. Of course naman, this is a highly subjective process that relies heavily on, okay, letter A, generally accepted auditing standards. Letter B, the code of professional ethics. Letter C, generally accepted accounting principles. Or letter D, the auditor's professional judgment. So if we go back to the statement, basically the main question that we find in number 2, and if you're going to look at the story behind what the statement is trying to tell us, basically it says, pagkatapos daw po na makuha ng auditor o magawa ng auditor lahat ng audit procedures, the auditor will now have to make a conclusion. So that very long statement would basically boil down to that. But after we have gathered the evidence, we are now ready to make a conclusion. And this conclusion, which will be embodied in our opinion, relies heavily on, and the answer to this is actually the auditor's professional judgment. Yes, it is true, we perform the audit in accordance with GAAS, or Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, and yes, we abide by the Code of Professional Ethics. But at the end of the day, whether the financial statements are fairly presented or not, whether we believe that the evidence we have gathered will point to the fact that it is fairly presented or not, is still a matter of our own professional judgment. And at this point, I would like to remind you of that video we had. Maybe it might feel like so long ago, but one of the videos that we had where we did discuss about professional judgment. And may I just remind you that professional judgment is not just the whim of the auditor. Hindi lang ito yung feel lang niya, okay? But it is a product of the auditor's experience as well as technical expertise as well. Okay, so feel free to go back to that video if you would like to, refresh your memories on how we discussed professional judgment. So, at this point, let's talk about evaluating materiality of misstatements. Kasi nga sabi natin, di ba, our opinion would look into whether the financial statements are materially misstated or not. So, in other words, we are not saying that the financial statements are free of all that the financial statements are free of all misstatements. No, that is not it. That is not what our audit is about. Because materiality plays a very big role when we conduct our audit. Okay, that's why we only say the financial statements are free from material misstatements. We are not saying the financial statements are free from all misstatements. Okay, so it's very clear. We always make that, particular, what do you call this one? Not disclaimer, but that particular highlight to the fact that we're only saying that it's free from material misstatements. So let's now review a bit on how we evaluate the materiality of misstatements. And we start that by, once again, defining what is a misstatement. And we have talked about this in the past, but just to, refresh our memories, I have pulled up for you the definition of a misstatement, and once again, in a classic auditing theory manner, it's full of words, just so much words right there. So allow me to highlight two very important words in that very lengthy definition of what a misstatement is. But basically, a misstatement is a difference between the amount reported and the amount required. Okay, or what may not even necessarily be an amount, but it could be a disclosure that was made versus a disclosure that is required. So basically, what the client reported versus what the standards required. If you see a difference between those two items, then that is a misstatement. All right, so that is, just to help you jog your memory up a bit as to how the standards or, the academicians would define a misstatement. Okay, so when we evaluate misstatements, we also have to remember that misstatements can be born out of fraud or error. And I'm pretty sure you had a very exciting discussion of this along the way, when you talk about fraud and error, and it can be spotted, it can be seen, it can be identified at any stage in an audit. And misstatements may result from the following things, such as, for example, an inaccuracy in gathering or processing data from which the financial statements are prepared, or it could be born out of an omission of an amount or disclosure. So just like, when you have an examination of conscience, it's not just the sin of commission, but also the sin of omission. So may not necessarily be something that you commit or do, but it may be something that has been omitted or has not been done or has not been reported or has not been disclosed. That would still give rise to a misstatement. Syempre nga naman, if the standards would require something to be disclosed and it was not disclosed. So there's a difference between what was reported, or in this case not reported, versus what was required. So that is still considered as a misstatement. or when there is an incorrect accounting estimate, because we know the financial statements, there are so many estimates in there, and if there is an incorrect misstatement arising from either overlooking the facts or a clear misinterpretation of the facts, that will also give rise to misstatements. And then, of course, if you talk about judgments of management concerning accounting estimates that the auditor considers unreasonable, or could also be out of the inappropriateness of the accounting policy selected by management. So if you could see the tenor or the tune to which misstatements are being seen, it's basically when there is a difference between what is required according to the standards and what management has put on the table for us when we performed the audit of the historical FS. All right, so these are the types of misstatements, and forgive me if some of these may sound a little bit repetitive, but admittedly, some of these might be reviews of the previous topics you have had, because like I said, it's a culmination. So this would tie up everything neatly. Okay, so just to remind everyone, these are the types of misstatements. You have, of course, what we call factual misstatements. These are misstatements about which there is no doubt. Okay, so factual. If you remembered our discussion on, say for example, our previous discussion on audit sampling, so when you see the misstatements in the sample, okay, so yung sa sample mismo, nakita mo talaga yung misstatement na ito without a doubt, this is a misstatement. Ang tawag dyan ay factual misstatement. Okay, but if you remembered when we also discussed audit sampling, we said that the errors or the misstatement that we find in the sample are generally projected to the population, di ba? And so therefore, that particular projection is now part of the third type of misstatement, which is called projected misstatements. So yung projected misstatements naman, these are the auditor's best estimate of misstatements in populations. And this would involve projection of misstatements identified in the audit samples. So if you talk about the actual misstatements within the sample, in our section, in our lecture on audit sampling, we call this one as the known misstatements, diba? So to which there is no doubt. That's known misstatement, or in this case called factual misstatement. But once you project it to the entire population using our projection techniques, some of which we have discussed, difference estimation, ratio estimation, right? So mean per unit estimation. So pag project na natin siya to the entire population, which I must remind you, we did not actually test. Kasi sample lang yung tinest natin, diba? But when we projected it to the entire population, ang tawag sa kanya, hindi na po known or factual misstatements, rather projected misstatements. Meron din tayong tinatawag na judgmental misstatements. Okay? These are differences arising from the judgments of management concerning accounting estimates that the auditor considers unreasonable, or the selection or application of accounting policies that the auditor considers inappropriate. So bakit siya tinawag na judgmental misstatements? Kasi basically judgment calls. Okay? It's basically management's judgment call when they prepare estimates. Okay, for example, when we ask management, why is this the percentage used to estimate, for example, uncollectible accounts? It's basically management's judgment. It's a judgment call. Diba? So napakahirap naman i-argue doon sa judgment. But basically, when management makes a judgment call with regards an estimate, or the choice of an accounting policy, tapos si auditor parang hindi siya agree doon sa judgment ni management, ang tawag dito ay judgmental misstatements. Alright? So kahit pala misstatements, may mga judgmental. And then of course, we have uncorrected misstatements, and you are correct. Pag sinabi natin uncorrected misstatements, these are the misstatements which the client has not corrected. Okay? So these are the type of misstatements. Let us now go to the question, starting with question number 3, which asks us about projected misstatements. So projected misstatements refer to letter A, misstatements about which there is no doubt. Nope, it cannot be letter A. Would you remember why? Bakit hindi pwede si letter A? Kasi si letter A is the definition of a factual misstatement. Okay, so yung tanong naman is projected misstatement, so it's not letter A. Letter B, differences arising from management's judgments concerning accounting estimates that the auditor considers unreasonable. It's also not letter B. We know that this is judgmental misstatements. misstatements. Letter C, the auditor's best estimate of misstatements in populations involving the projection of misstatements identified in an audit sample to the entire population. And tada! We know that this is the correct answer to question number 3. That is letter C. This is the definition of projected misstatements. Letter D naman, misstatements that the auditor has accumulated during the audit and management is not corrected is, of course, uncorrected misstatements. Alright? So, let's move on to question number 4. And this might wow, may mga numbers. So baka parang nawala yung antok when you saw the numbers. I'm kind of hoping. And while this is relatively easy to take a look at, minsan talaga pag si auditing theory, may mga numbers na lumalabas. Parang all of a sudden, nabubuhayan tayo ng loob. Okay. So, management estimates that the company's allowance for doubtful accounts is 200,000. And the auditors develop an estimate that suggests that the amount should be between 230 and 250. Okay, so take a look at this one. Si management daw ay may estimate. Ano yung ini-estimate ni management? The allowance for doubtful accounts. Yung estimate ni management, 200,000. Ngayon, si auditor, nag-develop siya ng kaniyang own estimate. Di ba part ito when we perform testing of estimates, right? So we develop our expectation. And in this case, the auditor expects that the estimate should be between 230 to 250. Management says 200, auditor says it should be between 230 and 250. Now the question is, the factual or known misstatement in this situation is it letter A, 0, letter B, 30,000, and the 30,000 I think is 230 minus 200. And then letter C, 40,000. I'm not sure where the 40,000 comes from. But perhaps between 230 and 250, siguro sabi 240 minus 200. I don't know. And then letter D, 250,000. That would come from, I think, 250,000, the higher end of the estimate, minus 200,000, management's estimate. Okay, what do you think is the correct answer? Now, before you tell me, as if naman talaga na mag-uusap tayo, before you come up with your final answer, I'd just like you to highlight that yung hinahanap natin is the factual or known misstatement. Diba? Si factual or known misstatement is the misstatement to which there is absolutely no doubt. And absolutely, when you remember that definition, you know that the answer is 0. Walang factual information, walang factual misstatement dyan. Bakit? Lahat yan ay estimates. Alright? So, at best, this could be a judgmental misstatement. But hindi siya factual or known misstatement. Products of estimates lang po. Alright? Let's now go to question number 5. So for question number 5, which of the following statements is correct regarding the auditor's accumulation of identified misstatements? So yung hinahanap natin is the correct statement. Okay? Letter A, the auditor must accumulate all misstatements identified during the audit. Letter B, the auditor must only accumulate individually material misstatements identified during the audit. Letter C, the auditor must accumulate misstatements identified during the audit other than those that are clearly trivial. Or letter D, none of the above. And if we choose letter D, ibig sabihin A, B, and C are all incorrect. Kasi yung hinahanap natin is the correct statement. Diba? So, in the case of question number 5, the correct statement is actually letter C. The auditor must accumulate misstatements identified during the audit other than those that are clearly trivial. So if you remembered, again, in one of our previous videos when we talked about materiality, and then when we asked ourselves the question of when will we know if something is immaterial, and we say that something is immaterial or a misstatement is immaterial if it is clearly trivial and inconsequential. So, sabi ng letter C, we accumulate the misstatements we have identified other than those which are clearly trivial. Okay? Kasi sa letter A, sabi ito, must accumulate all. Diba? Sabi nga natin, materiality plays a very important role, no, in an audit. So we have to consider materiality in the evidence gathering, in the evidence assessment as well. Letter B says the auditor must only accumulate individually material misstatements. Individually material misstatements. Again, when we talked about materiality and the concept of materiality as applied in misstatements, diba, paulit-ulit natin sinasabi, minsan kasi may mga misstatements which are individually hindi sila material, but in the aggregate, okay, when you total them, they might be material. Okay, so kaya hindi correct si letter B. Kasi letter B only looks into individually material. So that's why the best answer in question number 5 is actually letter C. Right, so let's now move on to question number 6. At the end of the audit, the auditor is supposed to accumulate and evaluate the need for adjustment of. So ano daw ba dito ang i-evaluate natin for adjustment? Letter A, known uncorrected errors. Letter B, unknown projected errors. Letter C, carryover of prior year errors. Or letter D, all of the above. So alin ba dito yung ipapa-adjust natin kay management? Okay, is it the known uncorrected errors? Known meaning factual. Unknown projected errors, kasi nga projected naman siya, so di ba best estimate lang ng auditor. O the carryover of prior year errors, yung mga errors of prior years that have not yet been corrected, or all of the above. What do you think? Okay, so the correct answer is all of the above. Kaya nga minsan nakagalit si management sa atin kasi pag known uncorrected errors, usually tinatanggap nila yan kasi they can really see without a doubt. Okay? The auditor was really able to see the misstatement. Pero minsan pagdating sa projected, medyo sasabihin ng management, estimate mo lang naman yan eh. Di ba? So, usually may mga points of disagreement in actual practice on those items. But please take note and remember that what we consider for adjustment are all of these actually. Okay, so that is for question number 6. And for question number 7, may mga numbers ulit. So, okay, a little bit excited na naman siguro kayo. Baka may chance to use the calculator. Di ba? Minsan lang tayo gumagamit ng calculator sa auditing theory. So, pagbigyan na natin. So, what is the likely aggregate misstatement when the audit results are as follows? So, take note, yung hinahanap dito is the likely aggregate misstatement. So, yung total, okay, likely total misstatement yung hinahanap. So, these are the information that we have. There is a likely misstatement of 1,000. There is an identified misstatement found in non-representative samples na 850. There are misstatements found in prior year's financial statements, 2,500, but of which 1,900 was corrected in the prior year. Alright, so in order to compute the likely aggregate misstatement, we would of course include the 1,000 likely misstatement, which is our projected misstatement. And yung identified misstatement found in non-representative samples, if you remembered anomalous errors, when we discussed audit sampling, di ba sabi natin, yung mga anomalies or yung mga anomalous errors, hindi sila pinoproject, okay, doon sa population. So you basically just have the anomalous error plus whatever is your projected misstatement. So kasali din yung sa 850. So 1,000 plus 850. Meron tayong carryover from prior years. Initially 2,500 yan. Kaya lang 9,500 has already been corrected. So yung ipapakorrect lang natin or what we will consider as part of the aggregate misstatement is only the uncorrected amount. And with that, we shall be able to come up with your likely aggregate misstatement of 2,450. Okay, let's now go to question number 8. When expressing an unqualified opinion, the auditor who evaluates the audit findings should be satisfied that the unqualified opinion, if we must remember, is the clean opinion, right? We say that the financial statements are not materially misstated. So, kailan daw ba tayo pwedeng magbigay ng unqualified opinion? Letter A, the amount of known misstatement is documented in the management representation letter. So, sabi lang ni letter A, basta i-document mo lang, okay na yan. Yan yung sabi ni letter A. Letter B says, the estimate of the total likely misstatement is less than a material amount. So say for example, our materiality is 10,000. Yung total likely estimate natin nasa mga 7,000. Yan si letter B. Pwede daw ba tayong magbigay ng unqualified opinion dyan? So i-reflect niyo, what do you think? Letter C, amount of known misstatement is acknowledged and recorded by the client. Okay, so take note sa letter C, acknowledged and recorded by the client, but it only refers to the known misstatement. Okay? And letter D, estimate of the total likely misstatement includes the adjusting entries already recorded by the client. So if reported by the client, ibig sabihin, corrected na siya by the client. So I think we are now able to spot the correct answer as to when we would be giving the the unqualified opinion, and the correct answer to that is of course letter B. Okay? Kasi si letter B, ibig sabihin, it's not materially misstated. Why? Yung total likely misstatement natin is less than the material amount. Okay? Now, before we proceed to performing engagement quality control review, which is again part of the process of the auditor coming up with his audit opinion and drafting his audit report, we have to stop our video. I'm actually taking the time to make sure that we don't exceed 30 minutes. And so far, I think I have about 4 minutes left, give or take. So if we continue this one, baka lumampas na tayo sa 30 minutes. So that's it for our first video in the audit report series. I shall cut the video right about now, and I'll see you in the next one.